In the savanna lands south of the Great Desert, salt was never merely a seasoning. It was a condition of survival. Without regular supplies, meat and fish spoiled within days, grain stores rotted, and herds grew weak. Yet the earth itself yielded almost no salt. The nearest deposits lay hundreds of kilometers north across unforgiving desert. Salt had to move, slowly, expensively, and without interruption, or the basic order of food, health, and survival itself began to unravel. Before coins, before banks, belief ruled the world. For centuries before the appearance of coinage, salt followed trans-Saharan paths. From the great mines at Taghaza, where workers cut rectangular slabs from the desert floor and even constructed temporary shelters from salt blocks, caravans loaded hundreds of camels and began the long southward journey. These slabs traveled to trading centers such as Timbuktu, Kumbi Saleh, and Ouderghost. There they met gold dust from the southern gold fields, ivory, kola nuts, hides, slaves, and cereals moving in the opposite direction. In many remote markets, the exchange approached weight for weight, not because salt and gold held identical intrinsic value, but because each side supplied what the other region could not produce locally. The exchange did not resolve at the moment it occurred. It remained tied to the arrival of the next caravan. The system functioned because salt possessed several practical qualities. The slabs survived weeks of desert travel without losing their essence. They could be broken into smaller, recognizable pieces for everyday transactions. In some inland communities far from the mines, salt fragments circulated directly as a medium of exchange, accepted by count, size, or measured weight using simple balances. Rulers of the Ghana Empire maintained large stockpiles of salt alongside their gold reserves. They imposed structured taxes on the flow, typically 1 gold dinar for every donkey load entering their territory, and 2 dinars when it departed. In this way, control over the salt paths became one of the central pillars of political authority and resource redistribution. But that authority only held as long as the flow continued. Yet this entire structure depended on continuous motion. Unlike later metals that could be buried and hoarded for years with little loss, salt stored poorly in the humid south. Its real power existed only when it reached places where it was scarce. The system allowed value to move across the desert, but it required that movement to continue. Without movement, value did not disappear. It became inaccessible. A caravan delayed by sandstorms, raids, poisoned wells, or the sudden death of animals could leave entire regions facing the dry season with dangerously low reserves. The journey required environmental knowledge passed down through generations. The location of seasonal oases, the rhythm of winds, and the distance a caravan could travel before water, load weight, and animal fatigue forced it to stop. It worked across distance, but only while movement, timing, and conditions aligned. Beyond that point, coordination became difficult to sustain. The trade further depended on sustained recognition between groups who rarely met face to face. A merchant from the north might leave salt slabs with a southern partner with the understanding that an equivalent value in gold dust would be waiting upon the next crossing. These deferred exchanges relied on reputation, repeated dealings, and the memory of trusted intermediaries, often Berber traders or North African merchants operating across cultural and linguistic boundaries. When safe passage failed for a season, the chain of obligation did not vanish. It remained in memory, but became harder to verify and enforce. What had once been mutually recognized began to strain under delay. For the individual farmer or herder in the Sahel, this dependence was immediate and unrelenting. When caravans arrived late, meat could not be preserved, grain stores weakened, and the margin between sufficiency and hunger narrowed. The biological need for salt did not disappear when a season failed. The obligation to secure the next supply persisted, even as time reduced the options available to the household. A family's labor, planning, and future security remained tethered to the uncertain rhythm of distant paths its members would never travel. Time did not release the obligation, it only made it harder to meet. This network supported larger and more stable settlements, but only under uninterrupted caravan arrivals. It allowed longer food storage and the accumulation of surpluses, yet both depended on salt continuing to move, and weakened when that movement slowed. Populations could expand beyond what scattered wells and seasonal grazing allowed, but that expansion remained tied to route reliability. Trade carried not only salt and gold, but also techniques, ideas, and people. The movement created durable connections between distant societies. But that stability could never be secured independently of the paths that sustained it. Yet the constraints were always present and became more pronounced at scale. Salt is heavy and bulky. Transport costs often consumed up to 80% of its value. Mines operated with slave labor in remote locations, where production could not rapidly increase. In years when caravans failed or mines were contested, salt prices surged sharply in the south. What worked at smaller scale began to strain under wider demand. At greater distances, delays accumulated. Across multiple regions, shortages could no longer be absorbed within a single season. These pressures strained social relations, tested local authority, and sometimes triggered conflict over remaining reserves. The salt paths therefore represented a structured solution to extreme environmental scarcity. They turned a biological necessity into a long-distance system of exchange, without coinage or written contracts. The system depended on controlled movement, mutual dependence, and managed risk. But the burden of that organization increased with every expansion. It worked within defined routes. It worked within seasonal rhythms. It worked as long as movement, memory, and recognition were maintained. Beyond that, the system tightened. As populations expanded and exchange increased, the weight of the commodity, the dangers of desert travel, the burden on memory across seasons, and the threat of disruption created mounting pressure. The system remained functional, but it could not expand without increasing its own strain. Societies gradually required forms of value that were lighter, more portable, more divisible, and less dependent on continuous transport across hostile terrain. The salt paths made long-distance exchange possible under specific conditions, but they could not escape the mounting weight of their own dependencies. In the next episode, we will examine amber routes, long-distance exchange. Through the movement of rare, durable, and far lighter materials across even greater distances, we will see how societies began to address the core limitations that salt paths could never fully resolve.